Cat.
I'm Arden XIII.
Welcome to our show, World Tiger.
Building Dragons.
So today we are continuing with our Practicum format and talking about our process in building specific things within our world.
Today we'll be focusing on building items, and we'll be revisiting the world that we came up with last time in our Practicum video. So if you haven't gotten a chance to check that out, the link is somewhere in the amorphous space here.
There's a lot to talk about, so let's get started.
So, we are going to start with building our own items in this original world. Kat, what does your process look like when you are building an item for any setting?
So most of the time when I start building out items, I think about the purpose of the item first. You know, I don't want to create an item that's, I don't want to say useless, because there are certain ways to build like a useless item in your world, and it kind of be like a joke, or it can be kind of an item from the past. But I really like to focus on the people that are using this item and the semi-story behind it. So like, why did people use this specific item versus using something different? Or is there a value to it, to these people because of it? So most of the time I start off with what is its purpose and what type of people use it and why. So kind of starting with that as the basis, or even starting with these people have a need, what item would fill that need? And kind of starting from there. What about you?
I think I'm very similar in the way I try to think of the significance of the item, or the purpose of the item, rather than, I guess, the significance. The significance can come with the purpose of how significant that purpose is to the people. But I don't necessarily think about the people that use it immediately. I think that might be a third thought process for me rather than a second, as it is for you. But I definitely want to start with the purpose of the item, and then I myself kind of very easily transition to like the design of the item and what it necessarily looks like. Then I think about the people, because generally the aesthetic of the item will fit the people who created it in some way, shape, or form.
I've always wanted to start with an item thinking about who created it first, just to see how that would work, because for me, like, who created the item kind of takes like 5th, 6th step for me. I'm never really, my thought process never really goes to who was this person that created this item. That's always just like, and then it was, and then insert a random name there. I don't really like focus too much on that, but maybe with the world that we're building now, with all of these dwarven craftsmen that are like the elites of this world, that might be something I have to focus more on, because they're gonna have their names everywhere.
They're gonna have their names everywhere. It generally, when you're creating something like just the automobile and Henry Ford, we understand that Henry Ford built the thing, but unless you yourself are dedicated to understanding who Henry Ford was as a person, the fact that he created the automobile is like really the biggest, his biggest claim to fame, and you don't really need to know too much else in that respect. You don't need to know about his home life, about his professional life. He built the thing, we're moving on. Unless the person is alive, I feel, then, you know, respect to their passing, but this is what is, their legacy is more important, I think, in the creation of an item. So everyone's process is different, as you just saw between Kat and I, explaining our personal processes in creating some sort of an item for our worlds. We have a few questions that we also wanted to throw your way. They'll be up here on the screen to kind of help develop your own process, asking yourself the who, what, when, wheres, and whys, and how they can kind of like double up on each other and help to formulate your own process. You don't have to follow ours. You can create your own, or follow ours if it works for you.
So now that we've got our list of questions out and we're ready to write, Arden and I are going to take a step back and kind of do what we did last year with our summer camp challenge. We're going to take 30 minutes to write in World Anvil all about some separate items. Same world this time, so hopefully our items don't clash. Just to make it a little bit easier, what item are you going to write about?
Well, I think if we discuss what items we're going to write about, then we can make sure that they don't clash.
Right, well, that's the point. I was going to make a utensil.
You were going to make a utensil?
Yes.
Of course you were. Okay. Then I might be the one to jump into trying to articulate the walkers. Not trying to be like the broad strokes of the walkers. Maybe I might just like whittle it down to a very specific walker. But I think that might be where I go with it.
Sounds like a plan. Well, we're going to take 30 minutes to write, and then we'll be right back.
Sounds good to me. You ready?
Yes.
All right.
Time skip!
Oh my god, you... Oh!
I haven't done that in a while. I forgot how stressful that can be.
You forgot how stressful that could be? I didn't start writing until like 5 or 6 minutes in.
Yeah.
So I didn't get a whole lot written, but what I did get written, I think is entertaining in some way, shape, or form. Not saying I want to go first, but let's talk about the process and let's talk about what we came up with. You mentioned you were going to make a utensil.
I did.
Okay.
I did.
How did that work out for you?
So it worked out pretty good. I kind of had a basic idea of where I wanted to start first. For some reason I had in my head that you were going to start with like making like a weapon or like a... You made a weapon?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fine. See, I knew that's where you were going, which is totally fine. But I wanted to do something
I'm becoming predictable.
I wanted to do something completely opposite. Like, okay, let's make an eating utensil useful. Right? Right. So I made something called, I think I'm calling it a Khel, or a keel. I think a Khel. I like that better. So Khel. So it's a Khel. Plural version of that is a Khelis, so I'll use those interchangeably. But it is a utensil used by common folk to enjoy food, most of the time soups, porridge, things like that. However, it has been outlawed in this world because it was a primary tool used in a revolt by the common people. So, here's how this works.
So the Khelis revolt?
Yes. So here's how this works. So it's basically like a spoon, right? But on top of the spoon, the scoop part, are these prongs. Most of the time, 3 or 4, they've got these prongs. And what you can do is you can pull a lever, and it will like move the scoop part back, so then you just have the prongs out, and you eat like that.
So you made a super extra spork.
Yeah, I did. That's exactly what I did. Yes. See, what I wrote exactly was the creation of the Khel was overseen by a dwarven craftsman by the name of Keldrum Degerlug. Dwarven names.
Degerlug.
Yeah. It was super popular among the common folk, mostly because it was a 2-in-1 utensil, and that made it, 1, easier for transportation. You only need 1 utensil per person instead of 2 per family member. And because it was the only utensil you really needed, you would hold on to that a little easier, keep it safer, so you were less likely for it to be like, oh no, where did my fork go? Like, you know, that is your fork and your spoon. You need that to eat. But since the revolt, it's kind of become a relic of an older time. And basically how this happened was there was another person who, after the Khels became super popular, they created a different version of it, where instead of it being like, you know, you pull a lever and the scoop moves back, the scoop was just completely able to take off, and the prongs were a lot sharper. The scoop of those kinds of Khels also had like a little symbol drawn in the center of them to like signify like, you know, you're having food, and you're eating it, and you could like turn your fork over, or you turn your Khel over, and it would have that symbol in the middle to be like, hey, I'm part of the revolution, but I'm still eating. You know, like, so that people would notice it. And then this revolt happened, and that wasn't good. So a lot of the leaders, or I guess we just have them as dwarves right now, but the higher ups noticed after seeing this revolt that like, oh, Khels are being used as weapons, we need to get rid of all of them. But they didn't quite piece together that it was like only a specific kind of Khels. So if you were there was a short period of time where if you were found with a common household item, it was like, oh, you were part of that revolution, you're in jail now. And so
So basically they built the Khel.
Yeah.
And then they
And then
decided,
someone
holy crap, they like weaponized that, and they like created some sort of that is a calling card for some sort of a revolution. And then from there they created the spork.
Kind of. But yeah, so how it all panned out was Khel Drummond, the dwarf, made a regular Khel. Didn't weaponize it, it was just him trying to make some money off of the common folk. Someone else, it was never figured out who was crafting these like more weaponized versions, started creating those and started passing them out as like a sign of revolution. Once that revolution happened, this common household item was just like banned, and all of a sudden people are like, well now what do I do? And the thing was is that they were super cheap, they were made with scrap metal, they were just a eating utensil, and all of a sudden this silly eating utensil was turned into like a symbol of a revolution. And so they had to take all of these Khels away from people, burn them down into something else, and so now most of the Khels are seen in like black markets, or you know, they can kind of be seen where it's like if you see one and someone still has one and you're like, what are you doing with that? That's outlawed. So from there on, it was just another tool to be like taken away from the common people, and now people have to either buy individual spoons, forks, or just
so
drink
in an
out of
effort
their
of
bowls.
somebody in someone's effort to create an all-in-one eating utensil, they inadvertently started a revolution.
Yes. And they screwed everyone else
and
out of it.
And they're like, no eating, like no all-in-one utensils. You
No
have to
more.
have forks
No
separate,
more.
knives separate, and spoons separate.
Well, even now, I would
Oh
say
my
that after
God.
this, they're gonna be like, you can only have rounded utensils, only spoons. If you don't, because like you don't want to give people forks, because that looks like the top part of a Khel. So if you have a fork, it needs to be rounded out.
That's a really fucked situation.
Yeah.
It's a really screwed situation.
I made a spork a weapon and made it worse for the people, all in one.
All right.
That's what I did.
Okay. So what I did, because I'm predictable, I created something called the Thorgren's hammer.
Ooh.
The Thorgren, it's not what you think it is. It is not a common household item. Basically in this, and one thing that I love about world building, not specifically on World Anvil, but just when you get into the process of world building and starting to create a specific thing, that can create fun little pathways and rabbit holes for you to follow in other avenues of world building. So the Thorgren's hammer was created in response to the development of the walker technology and the weapons that were being outfitted on these walkers in the midst of these wars that were happening in the wastes. The wastes obviously is this area of the map that I don't believe that we have articulated fully, where a lot of the mining for this unobtainium is taking place.
Yeah.
And so it is basically polluting and like sucking all of the life out of this area, hence why it is called the wastes. And obviously a war took place over this because people fighting over resources and so forth, and Thorgren's hammer was one such weapon. Thorgren's hammer is actually not like a hammer, it is this world's version of a tomahawk missile.
Whoa, okay.
Basically, the creator, Thorgren, I don't have a last name for him, was a dwarven warsmith, which is another fun little rabbit hole that we can go down.
Oh, lordy.
Is a dwarven warsmith who realized that there was becoming this stalemate in terms of the conflict between these different factions and their walkers, because other factions were creating walkers with heavier and heavier armor plating, so they couldn't be any of the weapons that any other person brought against them. It would take more resources to punch through this armor plating. So Thorgren decided, I'm just gonna make a big ass missile. I'm gonna make a big ass projectile that we can launch at these people to, if it doesn't eradicate their armor, it will just render it useless.
Right.
Basically the manufacturing and the inner workings of it, the way that I have pieced it together, is take the image of a javelin. It is 1,000 kilograms in weight. It is 5.4 meters long and 32 centimeters in diameter. Big boy. It is a big boy. And the average cost is 2.7 thousand gold pieces.
Good lord.
We haven't talked about
The
economy either. But again, more rabbit holes for us to explore. It is built...
Just so you know, 1 Khel was worth a base price of 1 copper. But you could add on, like, additions to it. Like, you could add on, like, a little
so it was
latch.
the spatula from that first episode of SpongeBob.
Yeah, you could add on a
with
little
port and
latch.
sideboard attachments.
You could add on a little latch. That way, instead of, like, having to hold the spoon back, you could, like, latch it on. That way you just have a fork.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, sorry. Just had to throw that on there.
That works. It's giving me more ideas for what this thing actually looks like. But the hammers are built in 4 compartments. The first compartment at the head of the missile, at the head of the projectile. I keep using the word projectile, not missile, in the article. But the head of the projectile, it's kind of an A and B sort of situation. There's the impact head, which has to make impact, and then it gets jammed back into this B section, which contains the warhead and starts the ignition. Section 2 has the explosive, the high octane explosive. Section 3 has a solution that makes sure that the high octane explosive in section 2, in compartment 2, does not ever come into contact or mix with the high octane thruster ignition in section 4. And then section 4 is the ignition for the launchers, basically to make the thing, zoom across the thing, zoom across the air. These anti-walker missiles, projectiles, were a great idea when they came out, and their most notable use was in the attacking of a dwarven fortress in the wastes. In 3 volleys of a squadron of heavy artillery walkers launching these things, they brought down an entire wall and shattered the foundations of those fortifications. So to this day, I don't know how long it's been since these waste wars, they have never been able to rebuild the wall in this specific location because the foundations were just completely
gone.
Just destroyed. So they're very devastating weapons, which is very fun. Oh, they were so cumbersome. I tried to play off of one of my favorite shows that I ever watched that was on Netflix, but it was originally on the History Channel, was like Nazi mega weapons of the Second World War.
Oh, yeah.
And how bonkers ridiculous that those things were. No, these things were not widespread and wide used because most walkers, they built the missile, and the missile was great, and they just thought they could slot it in to the average artillery launcher, and it didn't work out very well.
No.
So they had to build, like, feasible, viable launchers for these things, which cost way more resources than they anticipated, but they already built so many of these missiles that they had to, and so to this day, in abandoned missile silos in the wastes, you can probably come across, like, half a dozen of these things.
I was gonna ask
just sitting there, never been used.
I was gonna ask because one of the questions that we have listed out was like, was this item lost? Maybe what is its since we're focusing both of our items are from like an earlier age. So like, what do they do now? Like, what are they doing? And
Collect dust.
Collect dust.
That's what they do now.
So where did you start when making this? Where did you start? Where did I start
was, I think going back on my initial process, how I talked about it was I started with the purpose. And really how that translated into this article was I went through the type of item that it was. And I scrolled through that list and tried to get a better idea of what I wanted to do, because I couldn't decide whether or not I wanted to do a walker or I wanted to do an item on the walker. And at the very tail end, I found, like, ranged weapon, and I was like, sure, why not? Let's talk about a ranged weapon specifically that could have been outfitted on the walkers. Another idea they had, I almost went with a sensory aid in some way, shape, or form, and the original idea I had for that was like these weird prongs that you would put onto your walker that would send out like echolocation pulses. So you have another, like maybe a specific walker, it has like the code name, the Screamer, because these prongs are just constantly beeping.
Right.
And that's sending back information to the pilot of these walkers to say like what is where, and there are things around you.
I think something really interesting that I would like to do back on World Anvil was going through and looking at all the different types of items, because even just going through like consumable magic, consumable food or drink, drug, narcotic, medicine, jewelry / valuable, like that can give you a lot of ideas for like, I'd like to create an item, but I don't really know what I want to create. Going through that list of different types of items can give you a brief idea, or just a quick like, well, I haven't created a clothing item for this world yet, so let's try something like that.
I always bank on like military in some way, shape, or form. I don't know why, but so I made a missile.
There you go.
How did you start?
I knew I wanted to do something kind of silly, and so I was like, well, utility item, you know, I didn't know if I wanted to create like a bowl and I was like, you know what's really silly? Sporks. They're silly. So I just created a mechanical spork.
I can honestly foresee like these things happening or like being utilized in military ration packs or something, because they're
not
2-in-1s. Not anymore, obviously, but I can imagine like in the midst of, you know, the wars or whatever, these conflicts, and you know, soldiers being outfitted, they're handed their pack and it's like being read down the list. In your survival pack you will find 1 Khel, like
right. Well, and something I really wanted to reiterate with this is a common item used by common people. If you are someone who has a bit more money or has a bit more status, you will have that whole idea of like, I have 4 spoons, I have 4 forks, I've got 4 knives, you know, like that whole array will be set up as a sign of wealth, versus having a 2-in-1 utensil is kind of a symbol of like, I don't have that much money. I don't have the luxury. I don't have the luxury, so I have to make do and have a 2-in-1. But honestly, I would prefer a Khel over 4 knives anyway.
Probably. You sure at the end of the Khel you've got the spoon and the fork part here for eating, but at the end of it there's a knife. There's a blade on the end of it that you flip it over.
Oh, like a pocket knife where it like flips out. I mean, there you go. Done.
Spiraling.
I went back to what I focus on is building a story around it, and I really liked the idea of having something that was creating an item that is now outlawed, that has become a symbol of something else. So they started off as a common household item utensil thing, and now if you see it, it is seen as like a sign of a revolution, like a sign of hope almost. Like if you have a Khel hanging up like on your wall like a sword, you know, like right underneath your sword is a little Khel, it's like, that's a member of the revolution.
Grandpappy, that's weird. Why do you have that?
Why do you have that? That's illegal. They're not taking away my
The Khels will rise again.
And almost like as I was writing it, I was like, how goofy would it be if they made flags to fly during this revolution and it's a Khel. It's just a spork on a flag.
Oh my god.
No. I wanted something silly that inevitably worked with the world and reestablished this idea that we have these dwarven overlords that are ruling with this lower class that is kind of struggling just to get by, while this upper class kind of gets to do
whatever they want.
They took our Khels.
That's all I got. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let us know in the comments below something you enjoyed about today's video, or if you have an idea that you're willing to share.
If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure to hit all those buttons that everyone else bugs you about. We would love for you to join our lunch table.
And if you feel like supporting our content and love what we do, we just launched a Patreon, and we would love for you to join us there.
Every little bit counts, but in the meantime, I've been Kat.
I'm Arden XIII. I'm still waiting on that ramen.
We'll see you next time. Bye!